They say a house remembers what love forgets. I didn't believe that until mine started whispering back. When Daniel built this place, he said it would be the last nail he ever drove. Our forever home, he'd call it. A promise wrapped in fresh pine and drywall. Every window, every corner, every quiet beam carried his touch. When he died, the house felt like a body without breath, still standing but hollow. For weeks after the funeral, I wandered from room to room like a ghost in my own life. His boots still by the door. His coffee cup still on the counter. Grief has a scent, sawdust, soap, and something that fades slower than memory. It was on a Tuesday night, long after condolences had stopped coming, that the house made a sound I'd never heard before. A hollow knock, low, deliberate, coming from behind our bedroom wall. Not the usual settling of wood or pipes breathing out heat, but something patient. I froze. It came again, softer this time, like it was answering me. I told myself it was nothing, an echo, a shift. But when I pressed my palm against the wall, I felt the faint vibration of something hollow. Daniel had built this house himself. I knew every stud, every space between. There shouldn't have been emptiness there. The next morning, I went looking for his old plans, the blueprints he'd drafted and kept in a dusty binder in the workshop. Page after page of labeled walls, foundation lines, and perfect measurements. And yet, on the bedroom plan, something didn't add up. The room was supposed to be 12 feet wide. I measured it 3 times. 11 and a half. Half a foot missing, vanished into nowhere. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the same soft knocks, always in pairs. The kind of rhythm that feels intentional. The kind that keeps your heart waiting for a third. When the wind picked up, I thought I heard Daniel's voice. Not words, just that same low hum he made when working late. I turned on the bedside lamp. The noise stopped. I whispered into the room like an idiot. Daniel? The air didn't move. The silence was thicker than fear. I should have left it alone. But grief is greedy. It wants answers, even to questions you're not ready to ask. The next morning, I moved the bed aside and knelt down by the wall. The paint there was slightly different, glossier, newer. Someone had patched something, maybe long after construction. I traced my finger along the baseboard until it caught on the tiniest seam. Invisible, unless you were looking for it. My breath caught. That was when I realized. The man who built this house loved secrets as much as he loved symmetry. And now, this house was trying to tell me one. Movie camera, if you're still here, don't forget to subscribe. Because what's behind this wall isn't just a secret. It's a confession that waited years to be heard. Rehook. The wall isn't hollow because of bad carpentry. It's hollow because someone wanted it that way. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The air in the house felt different. Too still. As if it were holding its breath with me. I made coffee but forgot to drink it. The cup sat cooling in my hand as I stared at the bedroom wall. Every morning since Daniel's death had started with silence. That day, it started with a question. I went out to the shed, where his tools still hung in perfect order. Daniel had always been meticulous. Every hammer, every nail had its place. I found the small chisel he used for fine woodwork, the one he said was his truth teller. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Back in the bedroom, I pressed the chisel against the faint seam I'd found the night before. My pulse thudded in my ears. One sharp tap. The sound echoed unnaturally deep. Another tap. The paint cracked like old skin. I slid my fingers beneath the edge, peeling away a strip of plaster. Dust rained down. Beneath it was not brick, but a thin wooden panel. When I pried it open, a rush of cold air slipped through. Old, stale, like a breath trapped for years. Behind the wall, a narrow gap. Darkness. No insulation, no framing. Just a void wide enough for a person to crawl through. Something inside me said stop. But something else, that same quiet hunger that grief breeds, said go. I fetched a flashlight. The beam cut through layers of dust and cobwebs, revealing an old trunk pushed against the far side. My heart pounded as I reached through the opening. Fingers brushing cold metal. The trunk was heavy, too heavy to pull through. I'd have to widen the hole. Hours later, after splinters and sweat and hesitation, I dragged the box into the room. It was made of oak, scratched and worn, with a small brass lock. I didn't remember Daniel owning anything like it. His initials weren't carved anywhere, just a faint engraving on the lid. June. June. The month we met. The month we married. Or someone else? I stared at it for what felt like hours. My mind kept circling back to one thing. Why would he hide a locked box behind our bedroom wall? I tried the tiny keys from his desk. None fit. Finally, out of frustration, I struck the latch with the hammer. It broke with a dull crack, the sound swallowed by the carpet. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, bundled with string, aged yellow and soft at the corners. A faint scent of cedar and something floral. I opened the first one. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't even his handwriting. Daniel. It began. You said she would never find out. My throat went dry. The rest of the words blurred together. Fragments of longing, guilt, promises. Every letter signed the same way. G. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by someone else's words, someone else's love. The house felt smaller, like the walls had crept closer while I was reading. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere deep inside the house, a door slammed shut, though every window was closed. I whispered his name, but it came out broken. Daniel, what did you do? And then faintly, as if the house itself was answering, I heard it. A low creak from beneath the floorboards this time. Slow. Deliberate. The sound of something shifting just below me. Movie camera, if you're still here, stay close. The letters weren't the only thing Daniel hid. And what's under this house has been waiting longer than I've been alive. Rehook. The hidden room gave me his secret. But the floor was about to show me his sin. That night, I didn't sleep. The letters spread across the floor like open wounds. I tried reading more of them, but my eyes blurred every few lines. Each one said less and revealed more. An affair that spanned years, not months. Whoever J. was, she knew this house knew me. There were mentions of a kitchen window, of the garden I planted, of how she never suspects a thing. By midnight, the wind had died. The silence was sharp, almost metallic. That's when I heard it again. The creak from below. Slow. Measured. Too rhythmic to be the house settling. I followed the sound barefoot, each step sinking into the cold wood. The floorboards near the hallway were slightly warped, but I'd never noticed how uneven they were until now. The noise came from directly beneath the staircase, a soft dragging sound, like something shifting against the dirt. Daniel had sealed the basement door years ago, claiming it was unfinished storage. The door was behind the laundry room, covered by a shelving unit. I moved it aside, my hands shaking. The door was locked with a rusted padlock, but the wood around it was soft, easy to break. When the lock snapped, the smell hit me first, a mix of damp earth, rot, and something faintly metallic. I aimed my flashlight down the narrow steps. The beam caught dust, cobwebs, and old paint. It also caught movement. Something glinted briefly, then vanished. I told myself it was a reflection, but my heart didn't believe it. The basement was small, barely tall enough to stand upright. The walls were bare concrete, streaked with moisture. At the far end stood an old workbench, and beside it, something draped in a gray sheet. I took a step forward, and the wood creaked under my feet, the same sound I'd been hearing for days. When I pulled the sheet away, I expected junk. What I found instead made the flashlight slip from my hand. It was a mirror, tall, oval-shaped, its frame carved with initials I didn't recognize. The glass was fogged and uneven like old ice. But the reflection wasn't mine. For a second, I saw movement behind me, a shape standing in the dark. I spun around. Nothing. Just the quiet pulse of the house breathing in time with my panic. I lifted the flashlight again, and looked back at the mirror. My reflection was there now, but wrong. My eyes darker, my face drawn. And just behind my shoulder, faint but real, was Daniel. I screamed, the sound muffled by the concrete walls. When I looked again, he was gone. But the dust on the floor told another story. 2 sets of footprints leading away from the mirror. I stumbled backward, tripping over something metallic. It was a small tin box half buried in the dirt. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, was a photograph. Daniel. Younger. Smiling. And beside him, a woman I'd never seen, holding a baby. On the back, written in neat cursive, "Our real beginning, June 1989. My breath froze. 1989. The same year we met. The floor beneath me creaked again, louder this time, as if the house itself wanted to finish the sentence for me. Movie camera, don't go anywhere. Because the mirror wasn't the only thing Daniel buried down there. And soon, I'd learn what the house was hiding from both of us. Rehook. I thought the secret was behind the wall, but the real betrayal was buried beneath my feet. I don't remember walking back up the stairs. One moment I was staring at that photograph, and the next I was in the hallway, gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The house felt heavier, like every wall had leaned in to listen. The photo lay on the table in front of me, Daniel's arm around her waist. Her smile soft, confident, familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. June. The name etched on the box. The same name carved into the mirror's frame. I tried to tell myself it couldn't mean what I thought. Maybe she was family, a friend, a ghost from before me. But the dates didn't lie. He was with her the same year he met me. And the baby. Her eyes, they were the same gray-blue as his. I felt sick. I needed air. Outside, the sky was sinking into dusk. The trees swayed like they knew a secret I didn't. I walked to the edge of the garden Daniel had built. Rows of roses that never seemed to die. When he planted them, he said, "Every root tells a story." Now I wondered what stories these roots were feeding on. The next day, I went into town. I needed proof, something tangible to separate grief from madness. The local records office was small, run by an elderly clerk who barely looked up when I asked about property permits. "Daniel Carter," I said, "built our house about 20 years ago. I just need the old blueprints." He thumbed through a stack of files, then frowned. "Strange," he muttered. "There's a permit for 2 residential structures on that lot. Not 1. I froze. 2. He nodded, showing me the paper. 1 blueprint matched my home exactly. The second was older, smaller, marked Carter Residence Annex. The date, 1989. I left without saying another word. The world outside felt unreal. 2 houses. Same builder. Same land. 1 erased. When I returned home, the air was colder than it should have been. My coffee mug from the morning was gone. I hadn't cleaned it. The letters I'd left on the floor were stacked neatly on the dresser. Someone had touched them. The smell of sawdust hung faintly in the hallway. Fresh. Not memory, action. I followed it back toward the bedroom. The hole in the wall had been covered. Perfectly. The seam gone. Paint dry. My pulse raced as I stepped closer. "Daniel." I whispered, hating myself for saying his name out loud. The lights flickered. For a split second, I thought I saw movement in the mirror on the dresser. A reflection of someone standing just behind me. I turned. Empty. I pressed my ear against the wall again. This time no knocks. No sounds. Just breathing, steady low, on the other side. That night I couldn't stay in the bedroom. I slept on the couch, the photo clutched in my hand. I kept telling myself I'd leave in the morning, that none of this was real. But when I finally drifted into a restless sleep, I dreamed of June. She was in the basement, standing beside the mirror, holding the baby. Her lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then she looked up, straight at me, and smiled the same soft smile from the photograph. And behind her, in the reflection, Daniel stood with his hand on her shoulder. Movie camera, don't go anywhere. Because what I saw in that dream wasn't a memory, it was a message. And by morning, the house would make sure I understood it. Rehook. The woman in the photograph wasn't haunting me. She was waiting for me to remember her. Morning didn't arrive so much as it uncoiled, slow and deliberate, like a creature that had been watching me sleep. Light slipped through the blinds in thin, surgical bands, cutting the room into measured pieces. The air felt unusually dry, as if the house had spent the night exhaling. I lay still long enough to hear what it sounded like when it thought I wasn't listening. Minute ticks in the baseboards, a low, steady hum behind the north wall. A faint rush like breath moving through a buried throat. Nothing new was happening, not really. It was my attention that had changed. Once seen, the seams of a thing refused to be unseen. The house wasn't different. I was. Coffee steadied my hands enough to draw a rough floor plan at the kitchen table. During the renovation, I had pretended to care about framing diagrams just to impress him. Now those diagrams were the only honest language left between us. I marked vents I had never noticed, 2 returns that didn't balance, and a section of hallway where the studs, by standard code, should have measured 16 inches on center but produced a dull, irregular thud when I wrapped them. He built this house for us, he said, but he also built pieces of it for no one. Negative space sculpted for a purpose I had not yet earned the right to understand. I started where the morning pointed me. The linen closet at the end of the hall. It was a small cubby of order and domestic pretense. Folded towels, a cedar sachet, a box of bandages that still carried the old pharmacy's price tag. The back panel bowed slightly, not enough to attract a casual eye, but enough to betray load where there should have been none. Homes keep 2 sets of books. The visible accounting of rooms and fixtures, and the hidden ledger of what the builder couldn't say out loud. I measured 38 3/4 inches deep, although the hallway depth suggested room for 42. For missing inches. A love note addressed to no one and nothing, written in the arithmetic of wood. The tools I chose were polite. No sledgehammers, no violent declarations. A putty knife to tease the molding. A painter's pry bar to lift nails intact. A flashlight and a patience I did not recognize as mine. The panel surrendered not with a squeal but with a sigh. As if relieved I had finally asked the right question. Behind it, darkness. Not an empty cavity, but a slim passage. Plaster smoothed, edges painted the same off-white as my walls. A small courtesy extended by a man who believed secrets deserved finished carpentry. I am not proud of what I felt then. Not fear, not yet. It was closer to gratitude. He had left me something that fit in the hand. A thread at the edge of a rug, offering the promise that if pulled, the entire pattern would reveal its underside. The passage allowed only a sideways shuffle. Dust lifted in pale galaxies with each breath. It bent left where the hallway should have run straight. And there the air changed, cooler, with a faint metallic note like coins washed clean in a stream. I came to a second panel, this one latched from my side with a hardware store hook he would never have used in his visible life. The hook lifted easily. Beyond, a narrow windowless room, no more than 4 feet wide, running parallel to our bedroom wall. The floor was plywood, the walls double-studded. Soundproofing foam, charcoal gray, ecrate ridges, lined the far side. Somewhere in this house, we had slept inches from a room that had been taught not to echo. I stepped inside and closed the panel behind me to feel its truth. The room swallowed my presence. Even my breath lost its edges. On the right, mounted to a stud, sat a shallow wooden cabinet, hand-built, its surface sanded to a softness at odds with the secrecy. It had no handle, just a discreet lip beneath the face. When I lifted it, the door swung up, weight balanced by a small, quiet spring. Inside lay a set of notebooks, identical black covers, each marked in pencil along the spine with a month and a year. The earliest, June, small, careful letters, and then a date, 2008. Later volumes repeated the month, sometimes underlined twice, sometimes not at all. If there was a code, it was casual, the kind that comes from a long relationship with the private act of writing. A name? A month? Both are clocks that keep their own time. I have promised myself I would not romanticize this. The paper did not glow. There was no smell of roses pressed between pages. The first notebook opened like any other. The handwriting was his, tempered, methodical. Ink that rarely blotted. No salutations, no dear anyone. Just entries, measurements, material lists, notes about HVAC runs and load paths, annotated with tiny arrows that pointed to nothing I could see. Then, between a joist calculation and a reminder to pick up drywall screws, a sentence that cracked the floor beneath me. June says the hum is louder when the house is holding its breath. He had written it as if that were an ordinary observation. As if houses inhale and exhale and women named June charted the rhythm. If this was a joke, it wasn't made for me. I flipped forward. The entries resisted pattern. Electrical diagrams shared page space with observations about light. The way sunrise in winter enters obliquely through the living room and strikes the far wall like a metronome. The precise minute the front steps collect warmth after a cold morning. The arc of shadows cast by the maple when the wind turns from the lake. Interleaved with these were notes labeled tests, each followed by timestamps. 2:17 a.m. Wall vibration measurable with fingernail against stud. 2:18 a.m. Pressure differential at closet returns increases. 2:20 a.m. June braced. 2:21 a.m. Quiet. The word brace did something to me. It made her a person, not a month. It made the room small. I did not speak his name. Names activate forces we can't call back. Instead, I pressed my palm to the soundproofing and listened for any residual conversation held there. That's not how physics works, but memory has its own acoustics. I heard nothing but my blood. The third notebook had photographs tucked into its back flap. Polaroids, their white borders aging to the color of tea. A wall without a door, and then the same wall with a door painted to look like the wall. The linen closet as it had been and then as it was now. A woman's forearm, just a fragment, a pale crescent scar near the elbow. A line of tiny handwriting on one border. June, don't lean into it yet. I put the photo down. My hands were steady because my body had decided on a course and had not yet informed me. When you live long enough with a question, you start to collect the tools of its answer without realizing. In the attic I kept a moisture meter and a cheap thermal camera from the hardware store he used to tease me about. A thing I had bought for entertaining myself, by making ghost stories out of insulation gaps. I fetched them now as if they were bandages. In the hidden room's cool hush, the thermal camera showed me the house's heat like a language. The bedroom wall bled a colder stripe at shoulder height, an embedded conduit, or something hollow. The floor near the far end showed a rectangle that cooled faster than the surrounding plywood. A hatch disguised as uniformity. He had left me a trail made of temperature. I slid my fingers along the seam until the smallest give announced itself. The panel lifted with reluctance, sticky with age, revealing a cavity no larger than a suitcase. Inside were not bones, not money, not the sentimental detritus of a life. Inside sat a compact machine built with an engineer's private tenderness. A fan box wrapped in acoustic foam. A narrow diaphragm pump connected to a length of clear tubing. 2 small microphones affixed to brackets, their leads disappearing into the wall. And a small, off-the-shelf data logger. The kind used for monitoring environmental conditions in greenhouses. Its screen blank now, its battery dead. If you wanted to listen for a house breathing, this was how you would do it. If you wanted to record the breaths of someone who believed rooms could hold emotion and exhale it at night, this was also how. I could hear him in this contraption. The way he loved problems no one else believed were problems. The way he would build an instrument just to prove that the feeling you have when you wake at 3 a.m. and know something is wrong can be charted on a graph. June lived in these pages and wires as a presence that asked him to measure what can't be measured. To place a stethoscope against drywall and write down the truth it confessed. I could resent him for building a room I never knew about, but resentment is a blunt tool, and this required a scalpel. He had hidden a language, and he had left me a dictionary. What I felt then was not triumph. It was the sober acceptance that discovery is a contract. You pull the thread, you agree to meet what unravels. I gathered the notebooks, labeled the cabinet with painter's tape I could remove later, and photographed everything as I found it, positions, angles, the exact tangle of wire. I replaced the hatch and closed the panel. When I opened the linen closet and slid the visible world back into place, it looked unchanged. But I had walked through the looking glass and returned with nouns. On the kitchen table, I laid out the notebooks in chronological order. The oldest began at a construction site I barely remembered, when we were still practicing the lines of a life we thought we could keep. The newest ended 3 months before he died. In those last entries the tempo accelerated. More tests, shorter sentences, fewer digressions into the sweetness of light. One margin note, slanted hard. June's right about the north wall. Another, softer. If the house is a body, what does it hold when we sleep? This was either poetry or pathology, and I needed to know which, because the difference determines how you live with the person who wrote it, even if he is gone. I gave myself one rule before I turned another page. When the moment came to decide who June was, month, woman, ghost, code, I would let the evidence tell me, not my hunger. My hunger wanted a person, because people can be confronted or forgiven. Evidence is slower, but it holds. I steadied my breath to match the hum I had pretended not to hear for months. I sharpened a pencil. I wrote a new title for the day's work on the first blank page in my own notebook. A house teaches you how to listen. I will learn. And then, carefully, I opened June. I spent that night in the living room, too aware of the walls to sleep in our bedroom. Every sound felt amplified, the refrigerator's hum, the soft creak of wood settling, even my own breathing. It was as if the house had become conscious of me, waiting to see what I'd do next. On the table, the notebooks sat like silent witnesses. I couldn't stop staring at the one with June written on its spine. At dawn, I opened it again. The handwriting was familiar but rushed, less controlled than before, letters slanting, ink bleeding slightly. The first entry started simply, June 14th. She came to check the foundation today. Said the soil remembers. The soil remembers? It sounded absurd, but I had learned not to dismiss his strange turns of thought. He used to say that every house keeps the echo of the people who build it. Now I wondered if he had meant that literally. As I turned the pages, the entries grew darker. Notes about sound, temperature, and presence. He wrote about footsteps in the attic when no one was home. The sensation of someone standing behind him while he worked. And then, almost hidden between lines, he mentioned her again, June. She listens better than I do. She says the walls hum when they're afraid. That sentence stuck in my throat. Who was she? A partner? A caretaker? Someone who helped him with his tests? I couldn't remember any woman named June ever being part of our lives. The more I read, the more I felt the air shift. Guilt crept in. The kind that comes when you realize someone you loved was living in a world you never saw. He wasn't just building a house. He was chasing something inside it. Or inside himself. I stood up, needing air, but my legs felt weak. The morning light had turned sharp, cutting across the room in cold stripes. I caught my reflection in the window, pale, older, a stranger standing in my place. For the first time, I said it out loud. June. The name tasted metallic. A sudden click echoed from the hallway. I froze. It came again, faint, deliberate, like a latch releasing. My eyes darted toward the linen closet. The one I had already opened. The one that should have been sealed shut. I walked toward it, slow, every nerve on edge. The door was closed, but the air around it was cooler. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. Behind it, the silence was so thick it pressed against my ears. When I pulled it open, nothing moved. The passage was dark again. Still. But on the floor near the baseboard, lay something that hadn't been there before. A small, folded piece of paper, browned at the edges like it had been waiting for air. I bent down, unfolded it carefully. A single sentence written in that same familiar hand. If you're reading this, she knows you found the room. My throat closed. I looked down the dark passage again, half expecting to see a shadow moving toward me. But there was only the house, breathing softly, waiting. And for the first time, I couldn't tell if I was uncovering his secret or walking into hers. Morning light bled through the curtains, pale and sickly. I hadn't slept. The paper sat on the table, its message replaying in my head until the words didn't sound like language anymore, just a warning whispered between walls. If you're reading this, she knows you found the room. I made coffee, hands shaking, watching the steam curl like breath. Every part of the house seemed aware of me now. The pipes groaned when I moved. The floor sighed when I stopped. When I caught my reflection in the darkened window, I almost expected someone else's face to look back. By noon, I decided I needed proof that this wasn't just my imagination. The clerk's words from the records office echoed. 2 houses. Same lot. If that was true, there had to be traces, something physical. I started outside. The air smelled like wet earth and iron. Near the back garden, where Daniel had insisted on building that useless stone path, the soil had settled unevenly. I knelt, brushed the dirt away with my hands. Beneath it, old concrete. Cracked. Faint outlines of something rectangular, a foundation. The second house. My pulse quickened. I followed the outline, crawling, until I found something buried at the edge of the roses. A rusted door hinge, still bolted to wood half-eaten by soil. Daniel had built over it, hid it, maybe even sealed it himself. I ran my fingers along the wood. It was cold, smoother than it should have been. Not natural. Then I saw them. Faint carvings in the dirt-stained surface. June 1989. I stumbled back. My mind screamed that it couldn't be. But my body knew. The mirror, the letters, the baby's photograph. June wasn't just a name. She was the house. Or what was left of it. That night, the dreams returned. June standing in the garden, soil clinging to her hands. Daniel behind her, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then her eyes gray-blue like his, staring straight at me. When she spoke, her voice wasn't human. It sounded like the wind scraping through hollow walls. You're living in what we buried. I woke up drenched in sweat, the smell of dirt thick in my throat. The house was silent, too silent. I went to the window, half expecting to see someone standing outside. Instead, I saw footprints, fresh, leading from the back garden to the porch. Bare feet. Small. I stepped outside, flashlight trembling in my hand. The prints stopped at the door. I looked around, heart pounding. Nothing. Then, from inside the house, a soft creak. The mirror. When I reached the bedroom, it was standing upright again. I had left it in the basement, covered. Now it was spotless, gleaming. The reflection showed the room perfectly. Except one thing. In the mirror, there were two shadows. One was mine. The other stood just behind me, smaller, feminine still. I turned. Nothing. The air was freezing. My breath came out in pale clouds. I looked back at the mirror. The second shadow raised its hand. Slowly. Like it was reaching for me. And then the whisper, so close it brushed my ear. He promised we'd all live here together. I stumbled backward, crashing into the dresser. The light flickered, once, twice, then the bulb shattered. Darkness swallowed everything except the sound of breathing. Mine. And hers. Movie camera rehook. The house wasn't haunted by what Daniel built. It was haunted by what he buried to build it. Morning came like an interrogation lamp. White, unkind, exposing everything the night let me ignore. I didn't touch the mirror. I didn't breathe near it. I made a list instead because lists make fear look manageable. Call the surveyor. Pull county permits. Diagram the garden. Find the edge of the old foundation. Don't look back. By noon I'd rented a demolition hammer and laid out tarps over the kitchen floor. The machine was heavier than it looked, stubborn in my hands, but I needed the noise. I needed something louder than the whispers that had followed me from room to room. When the bit met concrete behind the pantry wall. The pantry Daniel built too deep, too perfectly square. The vibration traveled up my arms and into my teeth. The plaster gave first, dust blooming like a gray flower. Behind it, poured concrete, not framed studs. A wall that wasn't supposed to be a wall at all. Daniel hadn't remodeled a pantry. He'd poured a tomb. I shut off the machine and listened. The silence pressed back. Somewhere a pipe ticked. Somewhere a house settled into its secrets. I pressed my palm to the cold surface and felt it. The faintest breath of air seeping along a hairline seam. The kind contractors leave when they plan to come back and never do. I worked the seam with a flat bar until it widened to the width of a coin. Dust sifted down my wrists. A smell leaked out. Damp paper, old metal, the sour note of closed rooms. I pried until the slab edged free enough to slip fingers behind. Then levered an opening big enough for a shoulder. My shoulder. Inside, my flashlight found a narrow space no wider than a closet. Painted once and then left to forget the color. Shelves lined one wall. On them, a tin lunchbox with a cartoon rocket, 3 mason jars of screws, a stack of manila envelopes bound with twine, a jewelry box turned backward, a child's shoe, tiny white scuffed at the toe. The beam shook as I breathed. Not because the air was thin, but because this was not a room that had waited. It had watched. I reached for the envelopes first. Each was labeled in Daniel's block letters. Inspection. Permits. Witnesses. June. The last one wasn't just handwriting. The ink had run where a tear had fallen. Not mine. I opened June. Polaroids spilled into my lap, slick with time. June at a picnic table. A slice of watermelon in her hand. June in the garden, dirt on her knees, laughing at someone outside the frame. June in a hospital bed. Then a final picture. The back of our house when it was still 2 houses. An older clapboard cottage and a newer frame rising beside it, skeletal, hopeful. On the back, Daniel had written, before the mistake. I didn't know which part he meant, the building, the demolition, or the lie that followed. My fingers found the lunchbox. Inside, a birth certificate folded so many times the creases were translucent. June Ellis Carter. Father, Daniel Carter. Mother, Miriam Ellis. The date was a decade before me. A daughter he never told me about. A name I had been sleeping next to without knowing it belonged to a person, not an idea. The jewelry box? Not jewelry. A ring of keys, each tagged with brittle masking tape. Basement hatch. Shed. Meter room. One tag read simply, second house. The key was old brass, teeth worn smooth where a thumb had loved it too long. Behind the shelves, the concrete paused to become wood. A door flush, painted to disappear. The key slid home and stuck, like it recognized me but resented the fact. When it finally turned, the door exhaled a draft so cold it felt personal. I pulled it open and found stairs that bent left after 6 steps, down into the part of the house that had never been on any plan. The air had layers. The top smelled of dust and gypsum, the middle of wet leaves, the deepest of something preserved and patient. I counted the steps to keep the fear from counting me. At the bottom, another door waited. This one metal, industrial, with a postal slot crudely cut at chest height. The slot was taped over from the inside with yellowed packing tape. A note was pinned to it with a tack shaped like a star. If you open this, you agree to finish what he started. If you turn back, you agree to live with it. There was no signature. Above the words, a faint print of 3 fingers, small as a child's, smudged in what I told myself was rust. I peeled the tape. The metal sang softly under my knuckles. For a second, in the dead air between inside and out, I heard something familiar. The cadence of Daniel's voice reading blueprints aloud. The way he used to when we were young and stupid and thought houses were love-made timber. Then I pushed hard, and the door grudgingly surrendered. The room beyond wasn't empty. It was arranged. A narrow cot under a slit of a window. A bookshelf of spiral notebooks, each labeled with dates. A chipped enamel basin. A line of clothes pegs with 2 small dresses still hanging, long since surrendered to dust. On the floor, a hopscotch grid drawn in chalk. The last square was smudged like someone had stepped on home, and then never left. I went to the notebooks. The first pages were Daniel's. Sketches of beams. Load calculations. Lists of materials. Then the handwriting changed, looped careful. She wrote about weather. About the way the house sounded when it rained, like coins poured into a jar. About a visitor who came on Tuesdays and left gum in the lunchbox. About a promise. When the second house is finished, you can sleep upstairs. When the baby comes, you can pick her name. Then the entries stopped for a month. The next page was damp-streaked, the ink bled. He said it was safer down here. He said people ask questions when they see us together. I felt the shape of the truth before I could say it. He hadn't built a sanctuary. He had built a secret. Not to protect her, but to protect himself. The final notebook ended with a list that was not a list so much as a prayer pressed into paper. Door. Light. Garden. Sunday. Tell her. The last word had been started 4 times and finished once. Tell her. Tell who? I asked because speaking keeps time from hardening. The answer came as a memory. The first night in this house, Daniel waking from sleep, saying, "Do you hear that?" I had said no. He said good. The light above me flickered. The mirror upstairs pinged like cooling metal. Somewhere inside the walls something shifted. Not a mouse. Not pipes. Wait. A person's patience coming to an end. I took the keys and the notebooks and backed up the stairs. At the pantry, I turned to reseat the concrete panel and stopped. In the fine plastered dust on the kitchen tile, a second set of footprints had appeared beside mine. But smaller. They walked to the sink, paused on the step stool, then turned toward the hall as if answering a call I hadn't heard. My phone buzzed in my pocket so hard it felt angry. Unknown number. A text. Stop. Don't show anyone. She belongs to me. D. My mouth went dry. Daniel had been dead for 11 months. The phone vibrated again. A photo now. My bedroom. The mirror catching the bed. In the reflection, a woman stood where my head would be at night. Not me. Not June either, Miriam. The woman from the certificate. The woman from before me. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking into the glass the way you look through a window at someone you love and can never touch again. I didn't scream. I did something quieter and far more dangerous. I decided to answer. Who is she? I typed. Your daughter? Or the house? The typing bubbles stopped. Then you're standing in it. I lifted my eyes. Beyond the pantry, the hallway ran straight and narrow to the bedroom. For the first time, I understood the feeling I'd had since the day I moved in. That the floor plan read like an apology. He had built our rooms around his crime. The house was not on top of the secret. The house was the secret. I folded the text into the part of my brain that keeps people alive and opened the front door. The garden breathed in, soil lifting in a hush that wasn't wind. Somewhere close, a child laughed and then someone else shushed her the way you shush a memory you're not ready to live with. I locked the door behind me. One key in my pocket, another in my palm. If I couldn't trust the past, I would teach it to trust me. Movie camera rehook. He didn't just hide a room. He hid a life, and the house remembers every minute I don't. I had spent weeks mapping the house like a patient cartographer, joists and junction boxes, dumbwaiter shafts and the narrow run between inner and outer walls where Daniel's hidden conduits traveled like secret veins. By the time dawn broke on that Sunday, I no longer feared the creaks that once felt like a living breath. I could point to each sound and name it. Oak treads expand with heat. Old copper hums when voltage rises. Plaster sighs when the boiler cycles. Facts steadied me. But they didn't tame the one truth I had been avoiding. The house didn't simply make noise, it kept it. And it kept it on purpose. The switch for the attic fan, the one that never ran, clicked under my thumb. And a relay deep in the wall chattered back. I had traced that circuit the night before, crawling through cellulose insulation and history. It didn't feed a fan at all. It fed a network. Piezo pickups under floorboards, a cassette deck locked behind a baseboard register, and a loop of thin speaker wire stitched along crown molding like thread no one was meant to see. Daniel hadn't built a surveillance system. He had built a memory palace that could speak. Cassette tape, the old kind with ferric oxide, bleeds when it sits for years. Layers of sound print ghosts onto the coils beneath them. Archivists call it pre-echo or print-through. You can hear tomorrow arrive a split second before today. I knew that from a conservator's blog I'd read at 3 a.m., and it made every faint voice I'd heard in this house both less supernatural and more terrible. The whispers were not spirits. They were decisions preserved by a man who believed memory should be executable code. I closed the attic hatch and stood in the hallway where the runner warped at the fifth board. The same lift I'd stepped on the night the hidden door first swung. Below me, the house clicked like an old watch. In the study, the ledger I had found, materials, subfloor pickup, transformer, bias oscillator, lay open beside the will I still hadn't signed for receipt. All week, choices had circled me. Sign, don't sign, forgive, don't forgive, leave, stay. The house seemed to understand limbo. It had been living in a loop itself, waiting for someone to press play. I set the recorder we'd recovered, his recorder, on the desk and threaded the brittle tape with the care of a surgeon. The capstan stuttered, then found its pace. Static rose, the warm sea of magnetized rust. Then Daniel's voice, young, careful, almost formal, emerged. He wasn't speaking to June. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the house, to the future, to whatever set of hands might one day hold the thing he'd built. If the walls can keep the worst, he said softly, they can keep the best. Teach the wood to remember kindness, and it will eventually drown out what hurts. I think that's when I understood the shape of his sin. He had hidden more than a room or a ledger. He had hidden edits. The house's memories were curated. Nights of anger were blank where his splices lived. Days of apology were amplified. The haunting was selection bias disguised as architecture. And yet, beneath the curation, print-through betrayed the truth he couldn't fully erase. In the flutter between words, the earlier take always leaked through. June laughing, then June pleading, then June leaving. Always leaving. Downstairs, a relay snapped and the foyer speaker whispered to life, pulling from some contact microphone I hadn't reached. I followed the thread of sound like a trail, past the door where a section of baseboard had been recut with a carpenter's impatience. Inside the tiny cavity sat a second tape, unlabeled, its hubs fogged with dust. No theatrics, no envelope full of instructions. Just a thing left where a man's hand would find it when finally brave or broken enough to look. I took it back to the study, sat in Daniel's chair, and pressed record on my phone before I pressed play. Habit now, not mistrust. At first. Room tone. The soft tick of a mantel clock that was gone before I ever moved in. A breath. Then June's voice, not a ghost, not an archival accident, but clean, close, and devastatingly present. "If you ever listen to this," she said, "it means you kept the house and not me." No accusation, no heat. The hush of someone who has accepted their own edit out of a story. She spoke of cabinets Daniel had measured twice, of the way his pencil tapped when he did math in his head, of one winter they'd stayed warm by hanging quilts across doorways like fort walls. She asked him, gently like you ask a child to try, to stop recording and start seeing. Then she said the line that lodged behind my ribs. Memory that can be rewound is not the same as memory that can be forgiven. I let the tape spin to its leader, and didn't move when it snapped with a small, dignified pop. The house exhaled around me. Hot water drifted through the risers and made the paint tick. Somewhere over the kitchen, a wire sang with the refrigerator's draw. All of it ordinary. All of it newly holy. June had given me the missing axis. He hadn't built a haunted house. He'd built a denial machine with perfect acoustics. He wanted to live inside the best cut of his life. And when the edit no longer matched the performances, he hid the worst in cavities and labeled the future do not open. I carried the broken leader to the table like a relic, and realized why the house had kept calling me up and down stairs. Why every corridor felt like a question I hadn't answered. Daniel's system was still listening, still waiting for the ending it had never been given. A loop is a wound until you suture it. Until you choose. I stood. And the study chair scraped a clean syllable across the floor. In the hallway, the fifth board waited with its soft lift. Behind it, more tape? Another ledger? Evidence of crimes or of care? The curiosity coiled tight. Hot as grief, bright as survival. The house could remember whatever I taught it next. That was the terror and the power. I turned the attic switch one more time, and heard the relay click like a metronome starting a final movement. One last room to open. One last cut to hear. And then, no matter what the tape confessed, I would teach these walls something Daniel never could. How to end a story without erasing its hardest scene. Morning didn't come softly this time. It crashed through the curtains like an ultimatum. The air was brittle, motionless, the kind of silence that waits for a confession. I stood in the study where everything had begun. Daniel's desk, the dead tape, the open ledger. My own reflection in the glass of the window looked older than it had any right to. For a long time I simply listened. The house was still humming, low and steady, as though it were breathing through its foundations. I could almost imagine the sound as a heartbeat, slow, patient, human. I realized that after all these weeks, I had stopped fearing it. I gathered the notebooks, the tapes, the keys, every artifact of Daniel's denial, and carried them to the basement. The path felt longer than before, the air warmer, less hostile. The mirror still leaned against the wall, veiled in dust and memory. I pulled the sheet away and looked directly into it. For the first time, the reflection didn't shift. No second shadow. No pale child standing behind me. Just my own tired face. I knelt on the floor and laid everything out. The photos, the birth certificate, the letters marked June. "Here," I whispered. "You don't have to keep it anymore." The house seemed to listen. The pipes groaned once, a slow exhale through the walls. A flake of plaster drifted down from the ceiling, landing gently on the box of tapes like a benediction. I lit a match from Daniel's old desk lighter, and held it over the paper until the flame took. Smoke curled in the still air, curling around the mirror's edge. The reflection blurred, wavered, and for an instant, just an instant, I saw her. June. Smiling. Her hand resting on the shoulder of the small girl beside her. Daniel stood behind them, younger, unburdened. It wasn't an accusation. It was a release. Then the mirror cleared, and they were gone. The fire consumed everything fast. The letters, the tapes, even the last of Daniel's voice. I stayed until the smoke began to choke the room, until the air tasted clean again. When I climbed the stairs, the light through the kitchen window had changed. It wasn't the flat gray of grief anymore. It was morning. Simple, bright, alive. Outside, the roses were blooming wildly, out of season. Their roots had always run deep, too deep. But today, for the first time, that didn't feel ominous. I touched one of the blossoms. Its petals were warm. I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my phone. The text from Dee was still there, frozen in its impossible timestamp. I deleted it. Not to erase it, just to stop replaying it. For the first time in months, I made coffee without glancing over my shoulder. The mug didn't disappear. The mirror didn't hum. The floorboards didn't answer back. The house finally was quiet. Later, as I packed a small bag, I caught a last glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the one who'd moved in. She wasn't the caretaker of Daniel's ghosts. She was someone new, someone who'd lived through the story instead of inside it. Before leaving, I turned off every light but one, the small lamp by the front door. Its glow fell across the floorboards like a promise. As I stepped outside, a breeze rose from the garden and swept through the doorway. For the first time, the house didn't resist it. The air moved freely. It let go. At the gate, I looked back once more. The curtains shifted in an upstairs window, as though someone were watching, but this time, I didn't feel afraid. Some memories deserved to rest. I locked the gate, pocketed the key, and walked toward the road. Behind me, the house stood silent, no longer keeping secrets, only time. Movie camera closing narration, voiceover tone. He built the house to remember her. But it was me who finally taught it how to forget. In the end, he built this house to keep love alive. But it wasn't love that stayed. It was guilt. Brick by brick, memory by memory, he tried to trap time. And in doing so, he trapped himself. I thought I came here to understand him. But what I really found was myself. The ghosts don't live in the walls. They live in the moments we refuse to let go of. And sometimes, the only way to set them free is to walk away. So I did. And for the first time, the house was finally quiet.